Elizabeth, okay, we're good to go.
Okay. So we begin with roll call, correct?
Yes.
I have Erin Hull.
Here.
Mel Gregg.
Here.
Is it Oni Marchbanks?
Here.
Tracy Powell?
Here.
David Reinhold?
Here.
And Grant Yoder.
I'm here.
Awesome.
Elizabeth, I'm going to interrupt you. I want to welcome our newer member as well. Ryan Shantz is a newer member of the board.
Oh, okay.
Hey, everybody. I was here last time, but we didn't kick it off. So,
Oh, okay. I
Back-
remember your face now.
yeah.
Looks like we also have from the city of Salem, Gretchen Bennett,
Hi, everyone.
city manager's office. That's Gretchen. We have Lori Evans, Mark
There.
Weinstein.
No, let me give you that update as well. Lori is now doing the role that Mark had been in, representing the legal department, providing some legal guidance for us. So Lori is here now instead of Mark for this and future meetings.
Okay. So it looks like we need to move forward to approve the minutes from last meeting. Was that April?
That was in
July.
July. Yes.
July. Yeah, I'm like, this is April. I'm like, it couldn't have been April. So July. So I've looked at them. I approve of those.
I'll second.
Second, okay.
And was that Grant who seconded? Okay,
Yes.
very good. Thank you. And Elizabeth, we just want to check if there's any opposition or if all those are in favor.
Is everybody in favor of the minutes? Does everybody approve?
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Great. So all the minutes were approved by all unanimously. Great. Request for review. Those, okay, so we have none. Now moving forward here.
Elizabeth, does your paper also show an opportunity for public comment? We
You
want to
know,
make
it does. It looks like on my agenda, I had to go to the second page here. So I do see the opportunity for public comment here. So anybody in the public wishing to comment today?
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we afforded that opportunity. It looks like we're good. I don't think there's any public comment. I didn't receive any in writing either or anything, so.
Okay. So it looks like the next thing on our agenda for today is any requests for reviews, and I have none that have been received.
That's correct. I don't
Following, yeah. Looks like training. So we are going to be reviewing service to people with hearing impairments. Number 6 on our agenda would be police department updates, body worn cameras. And then we'll move forward with election of the chairperson. And that looks like that's about our agenda for the evening.
Perfect. Thank you. We can welcome Sergeant Hardy if he's ready. He's got the first piece for us, which is to discuss service for people with hearing impairments, people who are deaf or hard of hearing. If Sergeant Hardy is ready, I think we're ready for you, sir.
Thank you, Gretchen.
So I was asked to come and just speak a little bit from the police department side on services to hearing impaired persons within our community, and talk about ASL and how the department deals with that. So I'll just give some background. I came to the department in 2005. Prior to that, I worked at another agency, but I'm a child of 2 deaf adults. Both my parents are deaf. So I grew up in a home that was our primary language was American Sign Language.
So you're a CODA?
I am a CODA, yes.
My husband's a CODA as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. So so my background with the deaf community is pretty extensive, at least from where I came from. I'm born and raised in Canada, but my mom's family is from the South, from West Virginia, Virginia. So I kind of have a diverse background in it. And the deaf community in itself is a really unique community in that it's other than communication with people that are blind and deaf, it's really the only language, recognized language that's out there that is also linked to the American Disabilities Act. So it has a little bit of an overlap there, and so it's unique in that sense. So when I first came to the Salem Police Department, I came as a bilingual officer. I was hired as one. And the way the city handles that is they test everybody that applies as a bilingual officer, whether it be in American Sign Language or any other recognized speech language. So, Spanish or Russian or any Asian language. They have a process where they'll bring somebody in that is a certified person in that language. They will test the officer. And in my case, they brought in a professor from Western Oregon University, and this was back in 2005. And they came and put me through a battery of tests. And so they had a battery of tests of simple just communication. They also had me do some things such as, reading Miranda and law enforcement related things to see how I communicated in those forums. And if anybody has a question, just feel free to interrupt as we go. So it's pretty informal. So given that, I went through that testing process, and the professor at WU had certified me as a bilingual officer with the city of Salem, with the police department. And I think what's important is to clarify what we mean by certified. So in the deaf world with American Sign Language, because of the American Disabilities Act, there's kind of 2 different ways to look at certified. So I am not what you would call a court certified interpreter, which is somebody that, I guess the best way to explain it, has gotten a degree in deaf studies or a degree in American Sign Language, or has gone to a recognized school that certifies someone to be an interpreter. And that's not me. I don't have that certification, and the city doesn't generally do their language certifications that way. Now, you could bring with you a degree or some kind of certification that would be in addition to that. And that would kind of change that a little bit. But for me, I'm ultimately a kid that grew up in the deaf community, that grew up in a deaf home, and my primary speaking language was American Sign Language. In my home, in my community, all the families that we associated with were deaf families, one degree or another, whether it be the parents or the children, community groups, churches, all involved deaf people. So that kind of is a little bit of just the background and how I came to Salem. The way we interact with the deaf community at the Salem Police Department has evolved over the last several years. And I think it's a constant evolution and a constant learning process in working with the American Disabilities Act and recognizing how that affects citizens that we come into contact who are deaf, whether they be a witness of something, whether they be a complainant, whether they be a victim, or whether they be a suspect. I think we have to treat them all a little bit differently. So from my perspective and how we utilize myself or someone who is certified through the city for myself, for the police department, is generally now what I take care of is interactions with the public. So an officer will call me and say, hey, I got this call and the complainant is a hearing impaired or deaf person. Can you come assist? And there's 2 different ways I can handle it. I can either go assist in person, or I can do it over video call now, which is kind of a nice benefit that we never had years and years ago. So there's been several times where I'll just get on a FaceTime call with the officer and we'll communicate back and forth. And in those cases, my sole job and my primary responsibility switches from being a law enforcement officer to being an interpreter for the law enforcement officer. So I'm not investigating it. And I always explain this to the officers. I'm not here to investigate this for you. There are times where I'll take over if it's something more complex that may be easier for me to take over. But if they're going to be the investigating officer, then I am merely an interpreter as to what you said and what they said. And
Sorry,
I don't
Howard.
see. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Do you explain that to the person you're speaking with as well?
Yes, absolutely. And the key part to that is that, especially within the deaf community, is just explaining what is my role for them, because I think there are some times where it comes up, is this a conflict of interest? And the way we handle it, we try to stay away from those, which kind of brings us to suspect interviews. And the way I've kind of evolved in the job that I've done over the years is in working with Gretchen Bennett and their office is contracting and hiring certified interpreters when we're dealing with somebody who is a suspect of a crime. And I think what that does is it gives us a little bit of, I guess, it negates the conflict of interest, I think, in that case. And those are the specific cases where we want to say, hey, we didn't interpret this. It was a certified interpreter that interpreted for the suspect and for the police department and played that interpreter, ultimately, is what they're looking at. So a good example would be, actually this week it's come up, is that I am going with a detective who has to go up to the Portland metro area to talk to somebody that's not a suspect. They're just a kind of a third party person that they need to talk to about a case that they're investigating. And so I'm going up with them to do that. And so that is one of those areas where it's beneficial to have us, and really doing the preliminary contact, trying to figure out how we need to deal with this or what we need to deal with. And 90% of the time, I would say it's simply somebody such as, a person on this board that's saying, hey, I saw a car, do this on the roadway. And so we talk through that and what are the things that we can do to help the citizen out, regular everyday contacts. And so I've been involved with going over to the Oregon School for the Deaf and doing things over there. That one's a little bit interesting because that's actually state property. And so state police is actually responsible for taking care of investigations that happen on campus there. But there is a little bit of bleed over where sometimes we'll end up there making contact with them. And so I know several people at the school and have had contact with them. But that's kind of really, I guess, a really overall summary. I think the only piece that I missed was probably the beginning, is that obviously I'm not around 24/7. And so sometimes if an officer will come into contact with a deaf person, it's not uncommon to say, hey, let's write down what you have to say and communicate that way. And if it feels like it's more complex, then maybe we need to get somebody that can come and do interpreting for them. And that is really kind of, they just have to feel that out case by case on that. So any other questions or?
My father-in-law and my mother-in-law just moved here from Sacramento, where they have a bigger deaf community out there.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what he has found difficult interacting here in Salem, because there's not such a huge deaf community, is that he's deaf and partially blind.
Yes.
So oftentimes he has even, just walking him through the mall, I've had to be like, tell people he's deaf, he can't see and he can't hear, so he's not rude or anything. He just, So what services do you guys have for someone like that? Like, say he was caught as a suspect, right? And he has that other layer of disability.
Yeah, and so that would be, again, something that we would have to contact the city and talk to Gretchen and go through contract interpreting services to see what we can provide for that. Because you're absolutely right. When you add the vision impairment on top of the hearing impairment, adds a whole new layer to it. And it's still, it's still sign language as per se, but it's specific to people that have vision impairment, and it's completely different than anything that I've ever done or had experience with. And so
You
I really,
signed, you got to sign in his hand.
yes, yeah, and I wouldn't even attempt it. I wouldn't even attempt it. And so that is really kind of where we need to kind of figure those things out as we go. A good example would be I've gone on calls where the family is first generation from Mexico, predominantly Spanish speaking. They have a son that's deaf. And this was back when I was working in the gang unit and trying to figure out, okay, so can we communicate with them? So that's a little bit of a learning curve. And so sometimes it will take me going there and sitting down and going, okay, let's kind of go over some just basic communication things like, how do you sign this, or how do you sign that, or what's this, or how do you say your name, and can we physically communicate? And if we can't, then we need to look for another service. I guess the benefit of sign language is it does, to a degree, bridge borders a little bit.
Yeah.
So my mom was actually, back in the 90s, was awarded a Deaf Woman of the Year award. Long story, but she went to Hawaii for the award ceremony. It was an international award, and there were people there from all over the world. And the stories that she had of being able to communicate with people from different cultures and from different backgrounds was pretty fantastic, because of it's really that body language is what ASL is based off of, is physical body language. And so there are ways that you can communicate it. But for me, for my purposes, I would have to preface anything like that and saying that there could be a communication or a miscommunication here based on just subtle differences. And so we always have to give that caveat if that comes into play. So
Definitely.
it's a great question, though.
It looks like Mel and Ryan have questions as well.
Yeah, I was waiting to see who was going to go first for this.
I just real quick, I was just wondering if we know how many deaf people live in the Salem metro area.
I don't personally. I don't know if the city knows that. I am probably about 75% sure that information is gettable. There are several organizations within the city that work with deaf people, advocacy groups that have worked through the state legislature. And they're the ones that have, like most recently, added the legislative updates that for Department of Motor Vehicles, where now a deaf person can have put on their DMV driver's license, as well as the hit that an officer would see that says, "Hey, attention, this person's hearing impaired," which is great. It's a great addition to that, just to help that piece and help law enforcement interact and just the community relations with the deaf people. So
We next us into my second question, which is, what would police officers do, or what is the current policy for Salem PD if you encountered an individual that you needed to give orders to? They're not responding.
And so we have a policy that really it details that out. It really has to come with, officers have to, and we do training, and we have done training to help officers understand how that will work. I guess the best example I could give you is twice in my career, when I was a recruit in Gresham and when I was a recruit here, I had two FTOs, different FTOs, obviously, that a call came out, and it was an irate deaf person. And they were like, "Oh, this will be a really good test of this officer. Let's see how this officer reacts." And both calls I went with another rookie officer, and you could see their apprehension and how the deaf person was reacting, because when they're upset, you can imagine they're very animated. And so having someone like me here helps kind of just educate our department as a whole. And because for me, both FTOs, after they said they were super disappointed because you didn't even look like it bothered you at all. And they were like angry and just punching their hands and all this. And I said, it's no different than if we were to go to talk to somebody that they're upset, their voice is going to be raised, their inflection is different. But we as hearing people would look at that and go, okay, they're upset. They're not upset at me, but they're upset. And that was my experience of my background of saying, I've seen this before 1,000 times, and they're upset, but they're not upset at me. And so having that ability in the policy that covers that, and basically teaching officers that, hey, when you come into contact with them, there has to be some kind of a process of trying to figure out what are we dealing with here. The only flip side to that would be is that if it doesn't change, that if that interaction becomes more adversarial towards them, that they're going to have to, or they feel that that's the way, that they're going to have to deal with it the same way that they would with you or anybody else, that it was adversarial and it started to come towards them, and they're like, whoa, this is not what we're expecting, and having to put somebody into custody and deal with it that way. So there is that balance a little bit. We wouldn't deny that we would be foolish to say that there's no way that a miscommunication could happen, because it definitely can. But the best way that we can do it is to, again, from my experiences, train officers, teach officers, and we've had classes in the past, and we do have a policy that covers that. But great question.
Thanks, Sergeant.
Yep.
Sergeant Hardy, do you want to ask a follow-up? No, I know that you have a question. I have a quick follow-up on this before we move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that, is there anything in like our reality-based training scenarios during training where you do work with people where there's where they play out a hearing impairment or something like that?
I don't think we've done it in reality-based training. It's not something that we couldn't do. We could certainly look into it. I have a large background in doing reality-based training for this department and another department. We'd have to sit down and try and figure out how would that work, and how would we do that to where it's positive training. And it's very easy to have something like that go down a trail that we end up with some negative training. We don't want to do that. And so there is, but it's a great thought. It's something certainly that we can look into. It's complex, if that makes sense, to try and do that.
And then also, and this may be a silly question, is there any standard or thought amongst like the ADA or standards amongst policing for the way that we handcuff someone who is hearing impaired? So they are.
Yeah, and so that's something that I've discussed on numerous occasions. Is so a best example I can give you is I'll be on a call with a deaf person that ends up getting taken into custody for whatever the case may be. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I will have like a final conversation with them and say, okay, hey, so we're going to end up handcuffing you and putting you in the car. Anything else that you want to say at this point? Anything that we can talk about until you get to jail? Say it's not me that's transporting them. Or I've done other cases where I've done the transport to just try and to mitigate that. But to your question, absolutely. We have to think about that in all things, not just with deaf people. We end up with people with casts on their hands, or people, I've had amputees. And so how do you deal with that, right? And so not everything fits into the same box. And so with deaf people, it's the same thing. And there's nothing to say that we can't handcuff them in the front if we have taken care of all of the safety hazards or anything that we think that potentially could happen, then we definitely could do that in those cases. So.
Thank you, Mel, for letting me cut in real quick.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Great questions.
I was just going to say, really, if everybody asked their questions on the last one, my questions will have been asked anyway. I've been Hi, Jonathan. How are you doing?
Good. How are you, Mel? It's good to see you.
Nice seeing you. Actually, Ryan kind of asked the question. Obviously, when you know the suspect, witness, whatever the situation may be, is therefore hearing impaired at any level, they're not all fully deaf either, right? It's easier to start calling somebody to interact and communicate, help, whatnot. This is like killing me with my employment too. I'm thinking about, because we do have a fully deaf and mute employee, about more like active shooter situations, or just community emergency situations when we don't even know how in the initial interaction. I think you kind of touched upon it, that you're saying, hey, stop to somebody who's walking and they don't even hear you. And is it because they have earplugs, or are they deaf, or what is the situation? And has there been, you said it's not going to go 100% good anyway, but any issues with that? How do we train people exactly? What are we telling them? Because it's one of those disabilities that's the least visible.
Yeah, I think that, probably the best way that I can answer that is like in our community, we are a multicultural community. And not everybody's ability to speak English is at 100%. And so it is not uncommon. When I got hired with Gresham, one of the first classes that I ever took was what they called a tactical Spanish class. And that is probably one of the best classes that I have ever had, because it has stuck with me. And I know how to ask for somebody's license. I know how to tell somebody not to move. I know how to, get people out of a car. I can do those basic things. And so our training a lot of times really has a lot of overlap, and it transcends just when we look at just a small aspect of what we do, such as dealing with deaf people or the hearing impaired community. When you ask your question, the first thing I think of is, just because somebody is walking away from me and I'm saying, hey, stop, hey, you, my first thought almost always, because of the community that we work in, is they're not understanding what I'm saying, whether it be because of a language barrier or mental health issues or whatever. We have so many complex things that now what you're starting to see with officers is we're not, back in the 50s and the 40s where it was just, hey, I told you to stop and you didn't stop. A lot of times it's that thought process is going on. I told them to stop. They're not stopping. Why are they not stopping? And trying to problem solve that, and moving and trying to get in front of somebody and getting somebody's attention and trying to figure that out. I would say the dealing with mental health in that has probably been one of the biggest helpers to dealing with people on language barriers and hearing impaired people, because it's really taught us in the training that we've done that not everything fits in the same box. And so just because this worked on this call, it may not work on the next. I have a pretty loud voice and people can hear me, and I know I can project my voice, but there have been times where people just don't recognize what I'm saying, or they don't understand what I'm saying. And so it's incumbent on me to see that, to evaluate that, and try and really kind of get the best result of something. And that's really kind of the layers to the onion of our training that really kind of overlap on each other. Does that answer your question?
One quick question and one actually quick follow-up to what Grant said. Maybe the question is to Gretchen, are there enough adequate resources available for different sign language interpreters? Because it is different. A Spanish sign language will be different than English, right? American English is different than English, is what I understand.
Mel, thanks for asking. I think the only time I struggled with getting a fit was when I was working with people who were both deaf and blind, and we wanted that certification, and they were just a very small group. And so scheduling, it took a while to get someone available for a conversation we wanted to have on that. But that's the only time it comes to mind that I've struggled. That's not to say that there's adequate resources.
It would be hard, I imagine. Okay, and then Grant,
if I could interject, Mel.
Yeah.
If I could interject, I would. The challenge that we have is the amount of ASL interpreters there are out there is small just in and of itself.
Yeah.
So it really does, it reduces a lot. But what is available are services for deaf people, deaf schools. And so a lot of times you'll get somebody that will come here with, say, a deaf child, and they'll end up at a deaf school and going to a deaf school. And so it does, there is that, the language barrier on top of language barrier is really, really, really just infinitely small. Okay. And so I think that, Gretchen's right. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say, do we have adequate? It's just so hard to say because, but what I know is that we have people that we can call. We have, different resources that we can use. Even, being able to say, call a telelanguage line and saying, hey, maybe they have some services. And so there are places that we can go and try and figure things out. But I think we do a pretty good job on a state level in this city, and having the resources that we have available. And it's having a police officer that does sign language is like, it is like the less than 1%. And so having that at this department is fantastic. And we've had actually up to 3 people, I think, when we had some CSOs and stuff that knew sign language. And so it's certainly something that we're always looking for, and it's certainly something that we definitely want to provide for the community, especially because we have the deaf school here in town, and knowing that that's there. So,
Sergeant Hardy, what's a CSO?
A community safety officer. So the pickup trucks, they go and take traffic crashes. So they're just not, they assist all the police officers on calls that they can handle.
They're non-sworn civilian community service officers responding to non-emergency type of things. So I think what Grant was saying about handcuffing someone during transport, I was just going to ask, it's like closing their mouth. I understand the safety for the police officers, but it's just basically stopping them from being able to say, thought of George Floyd's and whatnot. If there's a medical emergency, there's nobody in the transport who would.
Here's what I can say is that they are very vocal. So deaf people they have a good ability to use their voice, and they can yell loud. It's what I would say is that the whole handcuffing thing has to come into play on what are we talking about, like not just the safety of the officer, it's actually the safety of the person in the car too. And so if you're dealing with somebody who's hearing impaired and maybe has some mental health issues on board, and different things like that, those are those layers that we're dealing with a lot of times. And so, or there's alcohol impairment or drug impairment on board. And so I completely understand what you're saying. I'm not negating what you say, but I'm just kind of interjecting that it's not so simple to say that, well, if their hands are behind their back, then we're closing their mouth.
Well, I have an employee I told you completely.
No, 100%.
It doesn't make any sound. That's what I just.
Yeah. So, but we definitely try to do everything that we can to make sure that we can, give them their voice as much as we can. Just because they're handcuffed behind their back doesn't mean that we can ignore them, right? So we have to pay attention to them. And so you can have somebody that is a white English speaking person put their handcuffs behind their back. They can speak, but they choose not to. And then there's some kind of distress that happens. So we have to be aware of what's going on there, regardless of anything. So,
sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mel.
So looks like we are moved forward with body worn cameras.
Thank you all for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, thanks, Sergeant Hardy. I really appreciate that. Well done. So I just wanted to give a quick update for those I haven't met on here. Lieutenant Brandon Ditto. I am the Professional Standards and Training Lieutenant for the Police Department, and between myself and Lieutenant Lance Deedy, and he hasn't been on this forum with this group, but he and I are the ones that are administering our body-worn camera program. So that's not only the implementation of it, but also managing the technical aspects of it and the software systems going forward. So I just want to give a quick update on where we're at with that. As a number of you know, we received a state-funded grant back in November of 2021. The first priority was to develop a body-worn camera directive, and that's been completed. We are going through a year-long directive review with an organization called Lexipol, and that directive will be under review as well. It's currently under review right now. But the current body-worn camera directive is on our transparency portal. So after the directive was updated, we looked at 3 separate vendors, and that was done primarily through the spring and summer of this past year. We looked at Axon was one of the vendors. We looked at Motorola Systems, and we looked at GTAC. Axon is kind of known for primarily, they were a taser company, and they came into the body camera space very early. So they're one of the oldest providers of body camera services in the country and frankly the world. Motorola Systems, they you've probably heard of Motorola with radio systems, things like that. We use their radios. And then GTAC Systems handles a lot of laptops and other tablet devices. And we also have some of their devices in our patrol fleet. So looking at those 3 camera systems and in-car video systems, we, after a lengthy process of evaluation, we settled with Motorola Systems. It was the system that came out on top through that evaluation process. And after that, it was through procurement. And as you know, throughout the country, we've been struggling to get products in a timely manner. There's been backlogs and delays with a number of products, but we were able to get all of our body cameras before the end of the year, all of our in-car cameras as well. We have a lengthy process of getting our fleet updated. So we're looking at a general timeline of having our patrol fleet updated with in-car video by mid-year to into the 3rd quarter of this year. But body-worn cameras right now, we're training our in-service period. So for the next another 5 weeks now, we will have our in-service training, which is where we train our department on a number of different courses. One of those courses is a body-worn camera course, where we are training all the officers on the body-worn camera system, and then we're slowly integrating them into the field. So not to overload our systems and make sure everything is functional and working well with our evidence systems, our relationship with the district attorney's office, the courts here in the city as well. And as of right now, we have 9 cameras in the field that you might see out there in the field if you're out and about. And we'll have up to 20 through the first part of February, and by mid-February, we'll be live with all the body cameras. We did purchase 193 body-worn cameras. We are not fully staffed right now. We have 177 out of 199 assigned and authorized people in the department. So 177 sworn right now. We have 199 authorized, and we were able to purchase 193 cameras. So we do have cameras for every single person. So on patrol or investigators in the field, you'll see body cameras being worn in those circumstances, and then with our special teams as well. So that's kind of where we're at for the fielding. Body-worn cameras will be kind of officially a go mid-February, and slowly through the next handful of months, we'll see the in-car video implemented as well in the field. And so I know I briefed on a little bit we talked about the directive before on one of our meetings. I can't remember, I think that was March maybe, that we talked about that, or March or April timeframe. And since then, this is where we've progressed to. So we're moving right along, and it's good to see that everyone's pretty excited. We had our first class last week for in-service training, and a lot of excitement to get the equipment out in the field and start using it. So pretty positive.
Very quick question. Hi, Brandon.
Hey, Mel.
Hey, will the sergeants be wearing them too? Just the patrol officers?
Yeah, sergeants will as well. So sergeants will wear them. All the sergeant cars will be equipped with in-car video. That's all part of our implementation plan.
Okay.
Lieutenant Zito, thank you for updating us on this, and thank you for being here so late. Will you come back in April or maybe in our next meeting and let us know some of the times that these have been used implemented?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Sorry. Didn't mean to cut off too quick there. If you have any questions.
No other questions?
I was playing around with the question, Lieutenant, in my head. You know, this might be something that I think likely can just be followed up on a later time. But my curiosity kind of stems to maybe how some of the more senior officers have taken the idea of wearing a body camera. And then if there's any, which this is the later part I was referencing, any type of disciplinary action that would occur for not having it on if in the course of an investigation, the recording was needed internally for that investigation and it wasn't available?
Right. So the first part is there were some mixed opinions about it at first, but I can say overwhelmingly now we haven't seen that as they start to realize the benefits of the system and what it can provide for them. It will streamline a little bit of a report writing that you can summarize things in your written report a little bit more.
Nice.
As the video is captured, and we've clarified that the video actually did capture what is on there. And the second part of your question, so within our directive, it outlines the times that the camera shall be worn and shall be activated. So if someone isn't consistent with that directive, we would treat it just the same as we would any other policy directive. We have a consistent and progressive disciplinary model. So some are just going to be inadvertent activations. Anything intentional would obviously be dealt with more severely than something unintentional. And one thing of note is within our directive, it does have a 60-day grace period of just learning the system. And what we found out was, even through the field trials, is that people with every intention of thinking their body camera was activated, they didn't tap the button, or they tapped it twice when they're supposed to tap it once. So I think we landed with the best system that was with the best functionality and ease of use. That was really a high priority, to make sure that the officers were comfortable using it. They felt like they can, they're not going to have some sort of human error on a daily basis. So I think we're at a good spot for that, but it is technology. Things will happen. There's noise cancellation issues. There can be rain can get on the camera and obscure video. People can get in a scuffle and it can get bumped a certain way or knocked off. As much as we try to resolve those, things will happen. But the intentionality of it obviously matters.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I can help out with this next part.
Please do.
You bet. I know it's a little tricky to do elections over Zoom, and so I can offer a pathway forward. Our bylaws ask us to elect officers at the start of the year, and so that's the chair position and the vice chair position. And I can let you know who's expressed interest so far. We can check and see if additional people are interested in also being considered. And then you really can make a decision. You can choose how you want to proceed. You could just vote as you did with the minutes, openly with your voice or by indicating kind of a wave of the hand or the little Zoom hand. Or if you prefer some privacy, you could send me an email, and assuming the internet world moves quickly, I can tabulate quickly and then let you know an answer. If you want to go with that private route, I do want you to know that that could be subject to public records request. And so it's not, it would only be protected to the extent that that would be allowed in public meeting and public records law, but to the extent possible could be protected. So with that, are there any questions before I can jump into the rest of that? Okay, well, I think so far what I understand is that Elizabeth is open to continuing in her role as vice chair at the pleasure of the group, and David Reinhold as a person who had served a full term on the board, and then the bylaws say we need to stop and have a break, and then now he's had that break and has come back on, has expressed interest in serving as chair or in a leadership position on the group. I haven't heard of any others, but there may be. I wondered if Elizabeth and David, if I got that correct, and if there's other people who are also interested, or if anyone would not want to nominate another person, that's also welcome.
I'm still interested in staying as vice chair. I'm continuing forward.
Gretchen, you are correct. I'm interested in being chair.
Any other interests or nominations? Okay, your next question then is to decide how you want to go about doing the election. If you'd prefer to have a voice or thumbs up, or if you'd prefer to email me privately.
I think doing it live would be perfectly fine.
Any objection? Okay, well, so let's see. All those in favor of David as chair and Elizabeth as vice chair, please indicate.
This is
And
Tracy, and I say yes.
Thank you. Any opposition? Okay, well, thank you for dealing with that slightly awkward process. And Elizabeth and David, thank you so much for serving. And David, we don't need to put you on the spot immediately. We can certainly welcome Elizabeth to carry out the rest of the meeting. I know we're near the end of the agenda, but then I'd be happy to get in touch with both of you about next steps for a future meeting.
Okay. And feel free to jump in anytime though, David, because I'm a little rusty. So next on my agenda, we've done the election of the chairperson. So any other comments from the board members?
I know that the council started meeting in person again. Is there any consideration for our group meeting in person as well?
Thank you, Grant. That's a perfect segue. I wanted to ask about that under this period of time. There's a policy at the city that recognizes the accessibility of being online and has set as a default that the boards and commissions would remain online. There is an exception process. If a board would like to consider coming back in person, then the city manager can approve exceptions to that where they return in person. And so you may want to discuss that and give me your thoughts on if you would prefer to remain with that online or come back in person. Happy to take questions or clarify that and invite your discussion.
Is there an
I'd like-
option for it to be both? Like the ones who want to meet in person can, and the ones who want to meet online be in the room with the online?
I'm afraid, I would like to, Oni, let me go back and double check that. The policy was written to be no because of the concern that we have so few meeting spaces that can actually support that hybrid environment. And they were worried about being fair to all of the different groups. And so initially had said no, but there are situations and rooms where that would lend itself. Like if you have an accessibility reason to be in person and an accessibility reason to be at home, for example, has emerged in another setting. And so I can certainly check in. We've had a transition in city manager leadership, and I can certainly check in if that's the request or pleasure of the group and see.
I think I would like to maybe have an in-person once per year. If we're meeting once a quarter, we can default to virtual, but then maybe by the beginning or the end of the year, the last meeting of the year, meet in person. That's just something in my mind to consider.
Gretchen, this group meets once a quarter. It's not like weekly meetings that would be using up the resources, conference rooms and whatnot. That should not be that difficult to do one in person a year.
And again, I'd like the option to not meet in person.
Any alternative or different viewpoints? I think I'm hearing check on the option. I guess if it was always an option, then folks could self-select, or the other proposal would be have one meeting in person and the rest online.
That one meeting in person could still be hybrid to meet everybody's needs. Because it sounded like hybrid was not an option either. That's why I think
Right.
with this one in person. If hybrid is an option, that would probably be good for public to be able to have accessibility to this meeting too.
Right.
I think that having never met in person the other members of the board and not being able to meet elsewhere because of a quorum, it would be nice to do at least one meeting in person.
Gretchen, this is David. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
If we ever have a hearing, that would be in person, correct? That wouldn't be virtual? Or would that be?
I would suggest an in-person hearing would be logistically easier. I've thought that through and think it would be really complicated because of the in the room and out of the room dynamics, that can happen with a case review hearing. And it strikes me as a lot easier and more practical to do that in person.
Okay.
Right. Are there any other comments from the board? All right. And if I'm following our agenda correctly, it looks like that is the last thing for tonight, and we can adjourn. Our next meeting will
I
be.
misunderstood. I thought you were still asking about this subject. Any other? I think, Gretchen, where are we with the ride-alongs? I know I haven't done mine.
Thank you. Overall, we've not had a lot of sign up or participation. I think one member is scheduled. And so for everyone who could be ready and available to go ahead and sign up for that, we would appreciate it. Thanks for the question, Mel. The bylaws ask you to have completed at least one before a case review, should we get a case review. So it's good to be ready and prepared in case that happens.
I have this biggest, for whatever reason, what's the word? I'm paralyzed almost with the social security number and sending it in mail or in an email. That is really bothering me. That's part of the reason why I haven't done so.
Thank you. I can sincerely appreciate that. How do you feel about bringing it in person?
But even then, I'm going to be leaving an envelope to someone. It's going to change hands. It's not going to get to the person. I don't feel comfortable sending it in a postal service. My mailbox here has been multiple times, attacked and broken into. It's just, I don't like giving my social security number willy-nilly to anybody.
Copy that. I can explore, I can make inquiry and see if there's any flexibility or another way to get to the goal,
Like what is it for CJIS purposes or?
My understanding is it's utilized to confirm background of the individual before the ride-along comes into play. But I'm going to tap Sergeant Galvin or Lieutenant Ditto if either of you have more detail on how that social security number is used and why we request it. If you don't know, I can find out and get back to you.
Yeah, I can talk to I don't know if it's that major of an issue. I know they just want to do a quick background check to make sure people aren't like a convicted felon or,
I'm in the CJIS system personally. I don't know about other people. Sorry.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm already CJIS approved, so.
Yeah, so I would suggest, unless Lieutenant Ditto has anything else to say, I'd say just leave it off. And if it's that big of an issue, then they can contact you about it. But that would be my take on it.
Okay, thank you.
I'll schedule mine, Gretchen. And can other board members get CJIS approval? Is there a need or a call for that access among board members, or is that something, Mel, that you have?
It's because of my job.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my question. Thank you.
Gretchen, do I get a reprieve from the ride-alongs?
I'm so sorry. I don't have, we would need to talk about that. There is a process for the city manager to waive the requirement for special circumstances that renews every year. So we need to check in and see what you're needing and then have a conversation with our city manager.
Okay, it's just the same stuff I told you about with my knee surgery and, so yeah, we can have a conversation.
Copy that.
So yeah, just let me know.
Okay, you bet.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course.
I actually have mine filled out. I just need to drop it off.
I do too.
So, Gretchen, this is David. I was just gonna let everyone know that I'm doing my ride on Friday, and I just found out that I guess the police department went to 12-hour shifts. So your ride along either start at 7 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock at night. And that's the only two options I've been told. So no longer any swing shifts.
Thank you.
Wait, so we have to ride with them all 12 hours?
I don't think you have to ride all 12 hours, no.
Oh, okay. Sound like I had to do a shift with her.
They'd probably be done with us by the time their shift was done.
Gretchen, maybe you and I can chat and coordinate with Lexi on, I don't think it's feasible to expect people only arrive at certain times. It's just as easy for an officer to, if a 3 o'clock works, than to come back to the station at 3 o'clock to pick somebody up. I think that's reasonable.
Thank you.
And we can talk about that more and coordinate it with Lexi. And also, no, you don't have to write for the entire shift. It's I think it's like for 2 hours as a minimum, and then, however long. Sometimes they get cut short because of report writing or, the type of a call or whatever, but it's pretty flexible.
That's good. So, again, are there any other comments from the board? Awesome. Gretchen, if you want to help me out here a little bit, we just are going to go over our next meeting, right? Going to be April 11th. If I'm missing anything.
Thank you so much. It was so great of you to jump in and do that, Elizabeth, and you did a great job. You're right. Our next meeting will be April 11th. Please stay tuned for how that'll look, in person, online. I'll do some conversations now that I've heard a little bit of your thoughts and get back to you. Unless we have a request for a case review that comes in too far away from April 11th, then I'll be in touch to schedule a special meeting.
Okay. Well, you all have a good night.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Gretchen.
Thanks,
You're all welcome.
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.